Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AKA Hotel Residences Corman Communities, Ariel Property Advisors, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Mortgage Lending, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Casamatides Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Ocean First Bank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, Stonehenge NYC, SVN CPEX Real Estate Services, Tierra CRG, the Meringo Family Foundation, and these friends. It's hard to believe that it's 20 seasons for the Stoller Report, and to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the show, of the new season, I brought together a group of business and real estate leaders to provide their thoughts of what's going to happen once the pandemic ends and once we have a vaccine. My guests today include Alan Suna, CEO of Silver Cup Studios, Leslie Himmel, co-managing partner of Himmel Maringoff, Jeffrey Levine, chairman of Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, and Clinton Management. And last but not least, Joshua Musk, chairman of Musk Development. So we started 2020 with some people saying everything was going to be great. Now we've gone through a series of crises. What do we expect when we have a vaccine? Because yesterday I was listening to the chairman of Cushman and Wakefield on CNBC, and he said he doesn't see the office market rebounding for 3 years. Leslie, you're involved with the office market, so is Josh, to a level. What do you see going to happen with the office market?
Well, Steve Maringoff and I founded Himmel Maringoff Properties 36 years ago. So I like to look at the pandemic and the protests and the extreme duress our business is under right now with perspective. Because if I don't look at it with perspective, I'm not going to be able to do what we've done many times, which is rebound from very tough times. So I think about October 19th, 1987, when the stock market crashed. I think about the early 90s when the government changed the rules for banks and all banking stopped. I think about 2001 and the horrible terror attacks when things were really bleak, as well as the tech bubble. And I look at 2008 with the financial crisis. And then I look at today and I say, okay, I know times are tough. I'm not going to minimize that the city's not under duress and a lot of people are working from home. I see light at the other side of the tunnel. Larry Silverstein's one of my early mentors, and he very early on did a one-on-one speech with Commercial Observer, sorry to mention that. And he just said, you know what, you got to see light at the other side. New York City is one of the greatest cities. Yes, we're going to go through difficult times. Unfortunately, the small tenants and retail are really having a hard time. But people come here because it is one of the greatest cities. I don't know if any four of us would be on this panel if we weren't in New York City to create our careers. So it will come back. I can't predict if it's 36 months or 24 months or 12, but I know that once the vaccine happens, I said this morning announced Russia's already has some vaccine. Once the vaccine happens, we will come back. And certainly this next 6 months, 12 months are going to be difficult. And I see it being, you know, maybe it's a V or a Nike swoosh. I have no idea what shape, but we will come back. It's a new chapter for New York, and we just have to change quickly with technology and how we're thinking.
So here, Jeff, you know, you're involved today. You're building new properties. You were allowed to build even in April. Where do you see today the residential market? Because yesterday I also noticed, I went to the Stuyvesant Town website, and they were giving 3 months free rent. They were giving free internet. Where do you see the residential market today?
Well, the good news is that I am already starting to see stability come back into the rental market. In the market rate rental market, you know, we saw occupancy fall from the high 90s, where they've been historically, down to low 90s and even a tad below during the peak of the virus. What we're seeing now is that by giving concessions, whether they be a month or two units, frankly, big concessions on the small units have not been that essential. We are keeping our occupancy above 90%. But what happened is when we dropped down, our collections were also going down. But today, since we've lost the weaker residents who have either lost their jobs or have voted with their feet out of New York City, we are getting up towards the 95% collection rate with our more stable tenants who have chosen to stay or chosen to enter into new leases. The affordable has been a very different story because, frankly speaking, this virus has affected those people who live in affordable housing, whether they be minority or they be lower income earners, greater than it has the market rate community. Many market rate earners continue to have jobs, were able to work from home, but people in food and beverage and hospitality and service work really were unable to work and were unable to pay their rent. So we saw rent collection, not occupancy. Occupancy stay steady in the high 90s. People were not moving out because they could not rent other apartments because in many cases they had no wages. Our occupancy stayed in the high 90s, but for a moment, our collections have dripped down to the 75 level, which was astonishing. Having said that, it has stabilized, whether it's some of the governmental programs of subsidy and benefits, or some of the people actually going back to work, which you see is happening in the city as we speak. But our collections and our affordable have also moved back into the mid 90s, which I think, the 90 percentile, which I think is quite good considering what's going on. So I'm very optimistic about the housing industry, multifamily, be it affordable, market, or seniors. In our seniors portfolio, we are experiencing not so much a collection issue at all, because many of the people in the seniors were on fixed incomes or on subsidy of some sort, but we are experiencing an occupancy issue because to protect our residents from the virus, we had to instill great measures of isolation and hygiene, and we do not allow visitors into the building other than for medical emergencies and such. We've been prohibiting family members. We've been, basically keeping our residents safe, and we've done a very good job, and I'm very proud of all of our frontline people in all of our facilities, both management of market rate affordable and seniors, because they've done a great job in keeping our residents serviced and safe at some risk to themselves and some great strides. So we're experiencing occupancy in the seniors, but again, there will be great pent up demand. And as soon as we have either a medical solution to the problem, be it a vaccine or a cure, I think that we will see residents' occupancy move up in all these areas. Because frankly speaking, urban living, and in my senior situation, suburban living for the most part, Generation X, which is the millennials, and Generation Y, still find Manhattan life, city life compelling. They want the activity, they want the action, they want the society, they want the culture. And seniors, the baby boomers, and we've all of us on the phone here, I believe, are baby boomers, except possibly for Leslie. Having said that, baby boomers are now no longer the majority in our society. My wife is appearing in the background. Hello, Randy, say hello.
Hi.
And baby boomers are now no longer the majority of our population. We've lost that role to the millennials, I believe. And that having been said, the baby boom generation entering assisted and independent senior living needs are going to fuel that as well. So I'm optimistic. I don't know if that was a question, but I continue to be very optimistic about the sectors in which I work, which are places where people sleep. The only exception being, I would not go into the hotel business, although I wouldn't have done that even before.
Which is perfect lead in, because that's what I was going to ask Josh. Josh had premier hotel, Marriott, in the borough of Brooklyn. Let's talk about the hotel, and let's also talk about the possibility of people thinking about converting the hotel room into a residential thing. How is the hospitality at Brooklyn?
Jeff, you sound like you were talking to your bankers there. Very optimistic. What concerns me, by the way, aside from the COVID, is how the city is being handled, and I'm sure we all agree with that. So one thing we did turn down was the opportunity to house the homeless. And truthfully, if an owner does that, it seems like it should be in a place like ours where there's no residential. But aside from that, I don't see any hotel in the country being able to survive this onslaught. And everybody has to think of alternatives. I've discussed with Michael, and we have looked at the alternative, for example, to convert it to housing. And it's a very good market where we are, and our rooms are rather large and could probably be done successfully, except you have a lot of city issues that have to be overcome. For example, every bathroom has to be made handicap. Well, if every bathroom were made handicap, we're right back in the hole. And so there's so much politics, so much ill will that's going on in terms of hotels. Happily, we are diversified. I hope that Michael would ask me on a different topic. I don't want to be as negative as I sound, but again, if there's no air travel, if there's no business coming into New York City, if there are no tourists coming in, who is going to go into these hotels? And that is a basic issue that New York City has to face. And I might add that the unions are not cooperating in any which way there either. So if you ask me specifically for the hotel question, Michael, I'm not optimistic.
Alan, what's happening with the studio business? Let's talk about the studio business in Long Island City and Silver Cup North up in the Bronx.
Well, the studio business shut down in mid-March with the explosion of COVID. It doesn't mean our clients went away. It didn't mean that they stopped paying rent, but the activity shut down. And, as a result, studio business is not just the renting of space, it's also providing equipment and other services. So, our revenue dropped by, probably, 40%, maybe 50% for quarters, 2 and 3 of this year, if you're averaging it out. The good news is that we've run the business very conservatively, as Jeff knows, for some time. And we, had enough cash on hand to not only maintain the business, but to make certain that every single employee that we have was not furloughed, was not laid off. We continued everyone's benefits. It's just the way in which we choose to operate. The studio business is going to really be robust, probably starting this fall, as it has been for the last number of years. The big issue there was getting the unions and guilds to agree on protocols on how work could continue. And they're just about finished with that. And in fact, a couple of our clients have already started back at work, building sets in one case and striking sets in another. We are fully occupied and will continue to be fully occupied well into next year. One of the positive things for the business that we service that came out of COVID-19 is that people were home and they're watching and consuming more content than ever before. The governor talks about being home with his daughters more now than he'll ever be even in the future. Well, when you're home with family, a lot of people have just been watching an awful lot of television. And they're not watching I Love Lucy anymore. People's tastes have really gone in another direction. So the demand for content is really, really strong, and we're expecting it to continue to be strong in the years ahead. And from the industry that we are in that regard, things, I'm very optimistic about it. On the other hand, all the rental housing that we had owned, we sold everything, as Jeff knows. I think the last piece we sold was probably in January of 19, and we got very lucky because the cap rates were great, and then all of a sudden the rules having to do with housing in New York changed by the city council. And I think that that's really one of the most unfortunate things that has happened because it is disincentivizing people like ourselves, like Jeff and what have you, to continue to build new housing because it's made it very uneconomic to build new stuff on a going forward basis.
Leslie, you're involved with the life science business. Let's talk about what's happening on the thoughts about the life science.
I think you also want to note Facebook last week signed up for over 700,000 square feet in the Farley building, and Blackstone's going to be doing a new corporate headquarters. So as much as there's been a lot of negative news on the office front, those are, one's tech, one's finance, some good news. Life science, I actually did a panel about a month ago, particularly on life science and the growth of it. And we own a property at 525 West 57th Street that we purchased in 2005. It's a complicated deal. It was known as the International Flavors and Fragrance Building. They had at one point had most of the building, did a sale leaseback, and then the operating position on the bottom 6 floors, they wanted an operator to purchase. So we're known for doing complicated deals and off-market deals. So it was brought to us, and we looked at it, and CBS was one of the tenants paying $16 a foot. Genzyme, which is known as a life science company, was also in there. And we purchased it in 2005, which at kind of a low cash on cash return, but in hindsight, it was kind of as $100 a foot, or the cost of a work letter right now that I'm doing for new space in my office, in our office buildings around Midtown South, and a lot of them that we own. When we purchased it, we didn't look at it as a life science building, but because we had Genzyme in there, and we also had IFF had a lot of their labs and their what they were doing. As time went by, we actually ended up putting in the preeminent MS doctor, Dr. Sadiq, and the Tisch Stem Cell Foundation, which is working on getting a cure to multiple sclerosis. And then Genzyme became LabCorp. So we kind of organically took this property, which has large floor plates, 50,000 square feet, and is in an M zone, which you need to be if you want to do life sciences. Now, CBS finally left after being there for 20 years, and we were sad to see them go, but at their very low rental, that was okay. And so what we've decided to do is make it more of a life science hub. We already had that. And CBRE is now going on a large marketing campaign for us. We renovated, we spent millions of dollars doing a double height lobby, making it very attractive with the elevators. And we did this because we're looking for green shoots. In this market, there's definitely, unfortunately, a lot of industries that are not doing well, but life science, not just because of the pandemic, but biotech and life science has been a growth area. If you look at Boston and you look at San Diego and you look at some of the cities around the country that have been hubs before we were, New York is quickly catching up. We have very little. Alexandria was the first years ago under EDC did that. There are a number of them in development. And the hard part is you need to have the right zoning, and which we have. And you also want to be near hospitals if you can. Why are they coming to New York? Talent, right? Because you need the scientists, you need the engineers, you need people who want to sit and do the research. And the interesting thing about life science, if you're in a life science lab, and whether it's a vivarium where you're working with animals, this is something you can't do from home. Or we're all like, you can't just sit on your screen. You're sitting there with microscopes, and you're sitting there with perhaps with animals. You have to be in a lab. So it is it's needed as science is going to develop. And we're excited that we have a project that, can take advantage of one of the few areas that is really expanding in New York City right now.
I know that Mr. Muss, I believe, is still involved with one condo development. At one time, Mr. Suna, whose mic is muted right now, did a couple of condo developments in Long Island City. Where do you see the residential condo market today and in the near term?
I'm happy to answer, Josh. You can go next. The reality is, I have waxed rich and I have waxed poor building condominiums. It's all a function of market timing, and having waxed rich and poor, I have learned that nor in my opinion is anybody else smart enough to time the markets to know that you will be delivering a condo product at a time in the economy where the job numbers are good, the GDP number is good, interest rates are low, the banks are willing to lend, and the buyers are willing to buy, because psychology has so much to do with it. I think we all know now that those condo projects, which have been overbuilt in the last 5 years as a result of the early success of the condo market in New York City post the Great Recession, starting with Gary Barnett's 157, every developer followed suit, and their oversupply of uber luxury condominiums are sitting in the market with bad absorption to start and worse absorption after this virus situation. So I do not know when that supply will be absorbed, but I fear it will take a very long time. But I know it will take much longer for the banking institutions to start lending to condo developers again. So that's not a place that I would want to be.
Josh.
I'm going to wax philosophical a little bit. I'm doing a lot more research on the internet than most because I don't spend as much time in the office as most because I've been thrown out. I'm going to have a lawsuit of age discrimination someday. But in the meantime, I'm looking at the overall market in terms of everything. And I'm fearful of a second wave. The first wave, where we are negotiating with tenants and we're negotiating with banks and we're negotiating amongst ourselves as to how to properly handle people. Some people claim they can't pay, some people can't pay. We're extending leases. Happily, we have enough to sustain ourselves, and we too have kept our people in full salary. But I think that at a certain point, some people are either going to despair of being able to hang tight. They will stop putting in capital improvements. They'll stop putting in their own cash. They're going to be concerned with all the ugly stories that we see in the New York Post, for example. And some of them I do believe. And we are concerned that the people who are manning these lifestyle offices may not want to come into New York. So there's still a second wave to see how we handle the second wave. The first wave, I think we're all doing fairly well. Anybody who's a decent landlord is making terms with their tenants. As far as condos is concerned, I don't think anybody's going to plunk down a big buck in most places in New York City until they understand what happens when the dust settles. They don't want to see the homeless, they want to see the police sustained, and they probably do want to see a new mayor, except we don't know what we're going to get into next. So all these issues are way on everybody's minds, and I'm not sure that we can predict what's going to happen. We don't even know what's happened already.
Alan, you're in Long Island City. What do you see the future in Long Island City? As opposed to the Uber condos that Mr. Levine talks about, you allegedly have affordable condominiums in Long Island City.
Affordable condominiums, it's almost like an oxymoron of sorts. I mean, they're all kind of expensive. I share the concerns that Jeff has raised and Josh has raised with regard to all types of housing in New York. You still have landowners, in terms of building new. Jeff and I talked about this the other day. If you want to build affordable housing, you really have to be able to find land at a reasonable enough price, or else the math just doesn't work. I think that there's a lot of people that have moved out of the city for now. This reminds me a little bit of stock market traders, is that as soon as they see something, they all, go like a bunch of lemmings. And so people have moved out. The real estate values in the suburbs have gone up. Even Mike and Jeff out in the Hamptons where you have your homes. I want to go back to something that Leslie was talking about before, and it's not limited to life sciences, but life sciences is a good example. I see a tremendous future in New York City in the world of life sciences and in tech, and not just because Facebook just signed a big lease and Blackstone is doing their thing. People do need to interact with one another, and we can do so on a limited basis this way in the world of Zoom. But you miss the richness of being in an office with other people, of all the other kinds of things that come up. In life science and tech, and those two worlds are actually converging to some extent. Leslie, talked a little bit about labs, but it's more than labs now. Labs maybe make up 40 to 50% of the world of life sciences. There's a tremendous amount of data driven life science applications, and the people that are living and working in that world want to be around others. I am optimistic from things that I have heard. I'm on the board of a major New York hospital that there will be some sort of a vaccine over the next few months. And I think that it's going to bring people back. Some people it's going to give pause in terms of returning, but I think more than anything else, all the strengths of New York about the density and being around other people, it's going to come back in a very strong way, and I'm optimistic about it.
So in summation, I'd like to say, hopefully we see the vaccine. Hopefully we see people return to New York. And I'd like to thank Leslie, Alan, Jeff, and Josh, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care, Mike.